All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. And again, I am going to follow these directions that hopefully you got. They're definitely pretty lengthy, but I thought pictures paint thousands of words. And this is a great reference, selfishly for me, also in the future. And we're going to start with cutting the paper that you need. And I'm going to recreate the desk calendar that I did. So I'm using the exact same paper. This is Magenta Madness as far as the cardstock. And then the designer series paper is the in color for the 5 that are currently in the in colors, and it's the 6x6. So what I'm going to be using is 1 sheet of 8.5 by 11 of the Magenta Madness, and then 1 sheet of the 6x6 designer series paper to make the calendar folder. First thing that you want to do is you want to cut your paper literally in half. I'm going to put my paper in on the 11-inch side, and I'm going to cut it at 5.5. And what I'm going to end up with is a piece that is 5.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches long. And this is going to be pretty much the base, the front of the calendar. And what we need to do with this is we need to make some score lines. We're going to be scoring for the pocket. So we're going to be putting some score lines at the bottom of the paper, and we're going to be scoring the sides of the pocket, which means we're going to put score lines down the length of the paper. So I'm going to bring my board back in. I'm switching out my blades. I'm taking out my cutting blade. I tend to put that as far away as I possibly can when I'm doing scoring, just so I don't mess it up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm turning my paper so that the 8.5 inch is on the horizontal. It's actually in the top of my cutting board. And I am going to score at 2 1/4 and 2 3/4. So I'm going to move my paper so I got it at 2 1/4. And I'm going to score. And then I'm going to push it over to 2 3/4. And I'm going to score. And just so you know what this is going to be, those 2 score lines are going to end up being the bottom of the pocket. So that's what we're starting to create right there. We also need to do some scoring on the other sides of the paper. So I'm now turning my paper so that it is in vertically. And I am going to make scores on either side. And what this is going to do is going to end up being the sides of the pocket. And the first one I'm going to do is at 3/8 of an inch. And for me, it's easier if I use the ruler on the right side of the score line to line this up. So I'm going to go over to the 3/8 inch mark, and I'm going to score. Then I'm going to scoot that over to the 7/8 inch, which is all the way over just to the left of that 1 inch mark. And I'm going to score again. And I am going to turn this 180 degrees because I want to mimic these 2 score lines on this side of the paper. And the easiest way that I know to do that is to literally flip it around. So I have my score lines that I just made on the, to me, the left side. And I'm going to repeat what I just did. So the first one I'm going to do is 3/8 of an inch. So just before the 1/2 inch mark. And I'm going to go ahead and score that. And then I'm going to scoot it over to 7/8. I'm going to score that. And what I've ended up with when I get to this point is something that looks like this. I've got my 8.5 inch wide, 5.5 inch tall. I've got score lines at 2 1/4 and 2 3/4 vertically. And then horizontally coming down from the top at 3/8 of an inch and 7/8 of an inch. And then up from the bottom, 3/8 of an inch and 7/8 of an inch. And what we're creating here is the front, the pocket piece of the card. In order to do that, we need to cut some of this away. We are actually going to be cutting out from the 2 3/4 inch line down to our second score line. We're going to cut that away, and we're going to do the exact same thing and mirror it on the bottom. And the easiest way to kind of see where we're going is in the directions. This is what we're going to do. We're going to cut pieces away, and we're going to end up with a piece that looks like this. The easiest way that I found to do this is to get my cutter back out, switch the blades. You want to cut this time, so pull out your cutting blade. And then where I want to cut, I've oriented this so you can see I have my horizontal score lines more toward the top than the bottom. And I want to cut at 7/8 of an inch. In other words, on that score line that I made up to my first horizontal score line. I'm going to do that by putting my blade in. I'm actually going to stand up so I can see pretty well where I've made that score line. And then I'm going to pull my blade up to that score line. And you can see if I hold this up that I've brought that cut up to that score line. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to cut that out. I want to do the same thing on the other side. And you can do this in two different ways. You can either line up your paper and bring your blade up to the top and pull it down, or you can bring your paper over and go in the same direction, the same motion that you did on that first cut. And I tend to do a little better, this is just me, if I am looking at the cut and I cut from the bottom up. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just mirroring what I did on the other side. What I'm ending up with, I've got these two pieces and I've cut them on that score line up to that first horizontal score line. So let's check in and see where we are versus where we want to be. We are at this point. We want to be at this point. We want these two pieces cut away. You have a choice here. You can either use scissors and cut the lines on your score line so that you cut and you pull these pieces away, or you can put this back into your cutting board and you can cut it away. I find, honestly, it's just as easy to take a pair of scissors and cut that piece out. And you will feel it and you might even hear it pop when you get to that corner and you cut the piece out. So I do that on both sides, and I'm going to end up with what I'm going to use to create the back of the calendar and also the pocket for the calendar. And I'm just cutting that right along the score line. All right, now I have this piece. I cut these two pieces away. So I'm at this point. I have this piece. The last thing that we need to do to the front of our calendar holder is we need to mimic the way that this picture is shown. And to do that, we have a visual guide. What we're going to do is grab your scissors and you're going to cut right along that score line so that you have a little tab. We're going to do that on both sides. And also on both sides, you're going to miter or make a little chisel into that tab because it will make it a little easier to fold if we can get rid of the edges. So just come in at an angle. Don't worry about the angle. It's absolutely perfect. You just need to have a little bit of an angle on that. And then you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So you're going to cut right up to that score line and then do a little bit of an angle and another little angle. And they don't need to be the exact same on either side, just a little bit so you have a little bit of forgiveness when you're pulling those pieces in. All the scraps that you have at this point, you can go ahead and put them off to the side. But we have arrived at this stage. We have this piece completed. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to grab our designer series paper and we are going to cut that into the pieces that we will use to put onto the calendar. And let me just bring back the finished one. We're going to have one piece on the back. We're going to have another piece on the front. The sizes for these pieces measure, each one is 3.5 inches wide. So I'm going to go ahead and I will cut my 6x6 to a width of 3.5. So I'll just put that in at the 3.5 inch mark and cut that. The extra piece will be extra. You can put that off to the side for now. The piece that you have left obviously is 3.5 by 6. And we're going to cut this into two pieces. One is going to be 3.5 by 4. The other is going to be 3.5 by 2. So that 6 by 6 is just a really nice size to start with because you have everything that you need to decorate the back and the front of your calendar. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to put those pieces onto the front of the calendar. So grab the piece that you have worked on, your base, and let me show you where these are going to go. And you're going to say, I know, you don't need to tell me. But let's kind of look at what we're looking at here. This piece that we've put together, that's going to be the back of your calendar. So one of the pieces of designer series paper is going to go on that particular part. But pause for a second because the pocket is going to fold up. So when you make those folds, the pocket is going to fold up like this, which means that your other piece of designer series paper is going to go on the front of the pocket. When you're lying that piece down, it's really the back of the piece that we put together. So I am going to grab some liquid glue for this one. You can choose whatever glue you would like. And I'm going to attach the designer series paper on the back of the area where my calendar will eventually end up. And also on the front of the pocket. And what I'm going to try to do is visually at the top of the piece, this is where the calendar will go. I'm just going to try to get the amount of space that I have between the designer series paper and the top of the cardstock the same visually on each side and also on the top. Notice when you fold that pocket over, you're not going to see the bottom of that piece of designer series paper, so you don't have to get completely perfect and go crazy. So I've got the back piece on, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over because the other piece of designer series paper is going to go on the front of the pocket. And remember, you're turning that pocket, you're folding that pocket up, which means I need to place the designer series paper to the pocket on like this. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on as well. And on this one, again, I'm just kind of visually looking at where my score lines are. In fact, I'll probably just give them a little bit of a push so I can see them a little bit better. And I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to say bad things about myself, but I'm going to do my best to get that piece that I cut, that designer series paper, as centered on that one as I can. And then I'm just going to say it looks right. And there we go. So I have put both pieces of the designer series paper onto what will be the pocket and the back for the calendar. At this point, what I'm going to suggest is that we just put the piece that we've been working on, just put that over to the side just for the moment, because there's one other piece that we need to, from our original piece of cardstock that we're going to use to start pulling all of this together. So let's just put this over to the side and bring back that second piece of cardstock that you started with. This is going to be the other half of that sheet. It measures 8.5 by 5.5. This is the other half of the sheet that I started with. Marty. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut out two pieces from this. One of them is going to be the back of the calendar. It's actually going to be this piece and the folds that make the stand. So we're going to cut that out of this piece. We're also going to cut out the piece that will end up being the pen holder. It's kind of hard to see in there, but there's a little corner piece that we're going to also cut out of this. So what we need to do is we're going to grab that piece of paper. We are going to cut it on the 5.5-inch line. So orient it into your paper cutter. So you have the 5.5-inch horizontally, the 8.5-inch vertically. And we are going to cut that at 3 3/4. So you're going to bring that right over and you're going to cut that at 3 3/4. This piece is going to end up being the back piece. But we need to do one more thing. We need to shorten the length a little bit. 8.5 is a little too long. We need to shorten it to 8 1/4. So you're going to need to take off 8 1/4, or take off a quarter to get to 8 1/4. So just take off a 1/4 inch. And that is going to get you to the piece that you're going to use. It is going to be this back piece, including the W. Well, we need to score because we need to make the little W at the bottom. There are 3 score lines for this one. And again, I'm being overly cautious. I'm taking out my cutting blade. I'm putting it in my scoring blade. And the 3 score lines that you need to do on this one are at a 1/2 inch, 1 1/2, and 2 1/2. And let me show you a little trick. It is much easier for me to hold the paper like this when I'm doing the 1/2 inch score line, rather than trying to put it in at the 1/2 inch mark here and closing the arm. It's much easier to do that 1/2 inch score line if I orient my paper so that I'm at the 1/2 inch on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my 1/2 inch score line. And then for the other 2, where I've got 1 1/2 inches and 2 1/2 inches, it's actually easier if I turn my paper around. So I'm going to put it at 1 1/2 and score, and 2 1/2 and score. And this is going to end up being the back of the calendar. And you can go ahead and you can put in the folds here just to get it kind of ready to go on. And it is going to end up looking like this. So you're going to have a little W looking thing. And the way that is going to attach, if I orient the same way, eventually we are going to attach this little piece to the bottom of the calendar front. And then we're also going to put the top right up against the back of where the calendar will go. Put this aside for just a sec, because what we want to do is while we have all of our paper out, we still have 1 piece that we need to cut. And we still have 1 piece left from that initial 8 1/2 by 11 piece of paper. So far, we've cut half of it, and we've used that to make our base. Then we've cut another piece off, and we're going to use that as the back. Well, there's 1 more piece that we need, and it's kind of hard to see, I know, but it's tucked in here, and it is going to be that little pen holder. That's going to come from the last bit that we have left over from our initial piece of paper. This one we are going to cut to 4 1/4 inches by 1 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that to 4 1/4. Four 1/4 inches by 1 1/2. And I'm going to need to make a couple of score lines on here because I need to have the ability to make that little pen holder. And again, it's kind of tricky to see, but it's a little sort of square in the corner over here. The score lines for this are going to be at 1/2 inch. So again, I suggest that you put your paper oriented at 1/2 inch on the right. I'm going to score that. And this time I can scoot it over. I'm going to scoot it over to 1 inch, and I'm going to score that. All right, I now have all my paper cut. I have all my paper scored for me to put the calendar together. And for this little piece that we just did for the pen holder, we are going to score it like this. So it is going to look like that. All right, so we have 3 pieces that we now need to assemble. Let's just look at them. got our card base that we've been working on. I'm sorry, the calendar base. We've started in on creating that. We put our designer series paper. We have the back that eventually we are going to attach. We're not quite at that point yet. And we also have the piece that we're going to use for the pen holder. The first two pieces that are going to go together are going to be the piece that we put the designer series paper on and the pen holder. We need to get these two done first. The easiest way to do this is when you are looking at the piece that you put your designer series paper on, turn it so that the pocket is away from you and the designer series paper for the back is facing you. And we are going to, let me show you where we're going to attach this, and then we will attach it together. We are going to attach the pen holder, but it is going to be right in here. So I've put it, there's kind of a visual stopper at the bottom of where your designer series paper is where you want to bump that pen holder piece right up against. You want to butt it right up against that. And you want to adhere it so that it is exactly aligned with the edge of your base. And the piece that's going to hold the pen is going to be popping up toward you. That's where the pen is going to sneak in. You have some options of how you can attach this. And this is where we get into tear and tape or liquid glue or whatever you want to use. I am going to be using tear and tape on much of the assembly for this particular project. And this kind of tape is really nice because it is a permanent bond. It's also very easy to use. The negative in it is it's a permanent bond and it's very easy to use because once you've set it down, it can be a little tricky to pull up without tearing paper. When you use this kind of tape, one thing I strongly recommend is after you've put the tape down, grab your bone folder and give the tape a nice kind of, it's as if you're pushing it against the paper. What this is going to do is it's going to get the adhesive under that wax paper that you're going to lift up. It's going to make it much more likely that you're just going to pull the wax paper up and not the adhesive when you tear the wax paper off. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the wax paper. And you can see where that tape is. It's like a tape runner. Tape runner would work on this grade as well. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my piece up at a 45-degree angle until I get it where I want it to go. And I've got it right up against the bottom of that designer series paper. And then I'm just going to lay it down. And it is there. It is attached. So that's where I want to get for my pen holder. That's where I want the pen holder to be. The next thing that we want to do is we want to create our pocket. Well, take a look right here. See that back flap? That back flap is the piece on the edge, that last little piece that we scored. I'm going to go ahead and give a good burnish to all the score lines that I've made for my pocket before I adhere it down, just so it will hold a little bit easier, cooperate with me a little bit easier as I'm doing this. I'm going to fold that tab in. It also will make it look a little bit cleaner, maybe a little bit more square, if I just do a nice little burnish on all of my score lines. Same thing on these two. So let me show you where we're going before I put any adhesive on. If I pull this flap up from the bottom, my goal is to bring the two tabs that I have on the outside and adhere them on the back. That's where we're going, which means that the adhesive that we're going to put on to hold this together is going to go on the bottom of each of these tabs on the end. That's where we need to put the adhesive. So if we look at this picture and we mimic it, I'm going to be putting tear and tape on these two pieces. So let me go ahead and do that. So I've got it oriented so the pocket is down at the bottom. And I'm actually, because I want to make these tabs a little bit shorter, and you can do whatever you know what, I will leave them. I was going to say, you do have an option. If you want to cut these tabs down, you can. They're really just going to be for kind of aesthetic purposes, but you can make them as short as you would like them to be. But let me go ahead and put the tear and tape, and you'll see where it goes. It's going to go on one of these little sides. And I cut that a little too long, and that's fine. I can just trim that before I take the wax paper off. And then I'm going to mimic that on the other side. And I guess this is a cut rather than tear and tape. It's also stuck to my finger. It's very strong adhesive, which is, again, is good and sometimes a little concerning. Now, you probably saw in the directions that I sent out this picture, which is the next step. And the glue that I put on the top of the pen holder. And I also popped in the Post-it notes. You don't have to do that, but it can be a little helpful if you have something that gives you a little bit more stability when you're folding this over. Again, you don't have to. Now, some people will put another piece of tear and tape here. I have found that to be problematic because what they will do is they'll actually attach everything and then they'll try to peel the tear and tape off. Kind of hard to do that. And it's kind of hard to adjust things when you have that tear and tape already ready to go and put everything together. Liquid glue on this piece, on this step, is much, much more forgiving because when I pull this back and I adhere the back pieces together, I can still stick my finger down in here and move this around if I need to, and I may not need to. So I am going to take off these pieces of wax paper. I should have burnished it before I did because I'm not getting the adhesive right at the end. So that was a bad one on me, but now I can pull that off without a problem. And then I am going to bring the sides up. Just kind of do my best to get it as aligned as I can. And then I'm going to do one side. So I'm going to fold this over and I will be able to see when that back is nice and aligned. And I can get it nice and squared off. And then I'm just going to put that corner or push that corner down. Same thing with my other side. I can try to get the corners squared as much as I can. And then put the adhesive down. You can take your Post-it notes out And then with your bone folder, you can actually push down a little bit and you can get that adhesive to hold well. You can also take a pen and you can put that right into that pen holder. And essentially what you're doing is you are pushing the adhesive on the back. Now, my pen holder, I think you can see it's a little cockamamie. Well, because I've got the liquid glue in there, I can push that over. I can make it straighter. And I would not have been able to do that if I had the tear and tape, which is why I like to put the liquid glue. So I was able to push that over and it looks much more like a square. So what we've done to this point is we have created the front of the calendar. We have all the pieces already set to do the back. That means that we're going to be attaching the piece that we cut from that initial 8.5 by 11. Before I do that, I'm going to go through the exact same thing that I did on the front of the calendar. I'm just going to give this a nice burnish because I really want this to have some strong creases in it to not only look nice, but also when it's attached so that it will support the calendar. And don't say any bad things about yourself if your scoring isn't perfect. You can see that mine is a little bit off. I'm really not worried about that. It is going to work out just fine. The way that we're going to put this together is we're going to have the back piece so that the W is popping out toward us. And we're going to attach the top of the pocket piece to the top of the back. Because if you look at the final calendar, you're going to have that little piece on the W is going to get put right up against the pocket. That means that I want to attach the top first. And again, you can use whatever adhesive you want on this. I'm going to use, again, the tear tape just because I want it to be pretty strong adhesion up there. So I'm going to put my tear and tape at the top, peel off that wax paper, and then I am going to put these two pieces together. And you can do this however you want. If you find it easier to put them down on the actual desk and do it, you can do that. But I want to make sure that I have those two pieces stuck right together. Okay. Eventually, this is going to stand up on its own. So let's kind of just pause here for a minute and look at what we have versus where we're going, where our end state is. This is where we are. We have our front attached to the back. We have our designer series paper all set. What we don't have yet are sort of final embellishments. What I have found is that it is much easier at this point to tie ribbon on the bottom if you are going to use ribbon. Meaning it is easier to do that now since these are still not attached rather than to try to get the ribbon on after we put this bottom W onto the card or onto the base. So I'm going to get some ribbon. And I recommend about 16-ish inches or so, really depending upon how much of a bow you want to tie. But I am going to cut some of my ribbon, and I'm going to grab about 16 inches. And then I'm going to tie that around the pocket. And that way I will have the ability to put the ribbon where I want it to go before I have everything put together. And I'm just going to take these out so they don't fall out while I'm doing that. And I'm going to bring my ribbon. What's nice about this is I don't have to commit to anything right now. I don't have to commit to where the bow is going to be. I don't have to figure out how high or how low on the pocket it's going to be. All I'm doing is attaching the ribbon so that I can finish everything, and then I can come back and I can decorate in the final way that I want to. So I am literally just trying to tie this into a little knot. And I'm going to leave it because later I can move it to whatever side I want, and I can bring it up or down if I want to do that. But I have it in place so that I can figure out what I want to do with that later. Okay, now we want to attach the bottom of this, which means that this little piece is going to get attached right to the bottom of the calendar. And again, you can use tear and tape, you can use adhesive, liquid glue, whatever you want. I'm going to use tear and tape. And again, I'm using it because it's pretty strong in this particular application. And it's going to be nice and easy for me to do. So I just put that right on that little flap, giving it a good push, and take off that wax paper. And then in order to attach this, what I do is I'm just going to hold up that pocket. I'm going to flip over the bottom, and theoretically, all I really need to do is to put the two together because they should be aligned. And voila, there it is. So this is where you have a ton of choices as far as how you want to decorate your calendar. And let me just give you a couple of thoughts. On the one that I made that you've seen, I put the calendar on the top. There's plenty of room for that. Well, you can also put the calendar on the bottom. That bottom pocket is the size of the calendar. The calendar will fit. So maybe you would want to put your calendar down here, put a nice little bow off to whichever side. Maybe you don't want a bow. Maybe you don't want the ribbon down there. Up to you. You could put a picture up here. A photograph would look really nice as a gift. You can also put your calendar up at the top, like I've done here. And then you have a lot of room to create whatever kind of embellishment or finish you would like. And you can put that down at the bottom. And as we were talking about a couple minutes ago, you can orient your bow wherever you want and put your embellishment wherever you would like. You also, going backwards here, you also have the ability of changing where you put that pen holder. You could put it on the other side, just flip it around. So if you want the pen holder on the other side, you can do that as well. But there are a lot of different options that you can use to put this together. So I'm just going to go back to the first one that I did. Put my Post-it notes in, put my pen in, and that is an example of the desk calendar. It does stand up well. The one thing I will say is you may want to push down on the upper part of the W when you first set it up, just so that it has a little bit more sturdiness, but it will set just fine and it will look really nice on anybody's desk. I think this is a really nice gift, a nice thank you gift. You might want to put some cookies in with it, but people will think of you as they flip through 2021. And God help us all, hopefully 2021 will be a little bit different than 2020. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.